Leave it immediately. The billionaire's voice boomed, and at the same moment another plate crashed to the floor, shattering the porcelain into 1,000 pieces. The echoes of that roar spread through the hall like thunder on a summer night. Elegant guests in tuxedos and evening gowns looked up from their glasses of champagne. Some people opened their mouths in astonishment. Others twisted their faces in contempt. The sound of breaking glass in such a luxurious setting sounded almost blasphemous. In the middle of the room, right next to a table covered with crystal glasses, sat a boy. He was only 7 years old, but his eyes burned with an anger that would make many adults ashamed. Little hands trembling with anger reached for another plate. Leonard, the man in the navy blue suit, known throughout the city as one of the richest men, extended his hand toward his son. Stop this immediately. But the boy didn't even look at his father. There was more to his childish face than just whimsy or spoiled whims. There was sadness, frustration, and a cry that no one wanted to hear until now. The guests began to whisper among themselves. This child is out of control. All the father has is money. But he can't raise the child. And this is the most exclusive restaurant in the entire city. The millionaire felt the blood rush to his face. He was accustomed to arousing respect and sometimes even fear wherever he appeared. This time, however, instead of admiration, the audience looked at him with condescension and criticism. Another plate crashed to the floor. The noise was mixed with the quiet giggles of the younger guests and the indignation of the older ones. The waiters stood uncertainly, unsure whether to intervene or pretend nothing was happening. In the corner of the room, right next to the buffet, stood a young girl. In her white shirt and simple apron, she looked like a shadow. No one noticed her, neither before nor now. Her name was Laura. She had only been working at the restaurant for a month and prayed every day that no one would notice her. She was shy, spoke softly, and felt like she was just an extra in this place full of rich people and their idle conversations. But now she looked at the boy and saw something familiar in that cry, in that anger. She herself remembered well the childhood nights when her younger brother cried himself to sleep. My father slammed the door because he didn't have the patience to listen. She knew this feeling of helplessness all too well. Meanwhile, Leonardo's father leaned over his phone and squeezed his shoulder. Enough of this, he hissed through clenched teeth. Are you making fun of me? But the boy broke free from his grip and with wild stubbornness threw another glass at the floor. There was another crack, and the crystal shattered like ice in a frosty wind. Please do something, a woman from the next table shouted, raising her hands as if afraid that the shrapnel would reach her dress. The restaurant owner, pale as a sheet, emerged from the bar but hesitated. You couldn't throw a millionaire out. He financed several cultural events in the city. His name opened doors and closed mouths. Laura felt her heart beating faster and faster. She knew she shouldn't interfere. She knew it was none of her business. Yet something inside pushed her forward. She took a step, then another. Each step sounded like a drumbeat in her ears, even though no one in the room could hear it. She was invisible to the guests until she stood right next to the table. Madam, whispered uncertainly the young waiter, who knew Laura from the kitchen. Do not do this. But she wasn't listening anymore. She looked directly at the boy. His small hand was reaching for a silver fork. His eyes were full of tears and anger. Laura knelt down next to him. She didn't say a word. It was an instinctive gesture, quiet, simple, and yet brave. She reached out her hand to Leonard hesitantly, as if she was offering something that could be accepted or rejected. And then something happened that no one expected. The boy stopped crying. Instead of throwing the cutlery, he looked at the girl. His breathing, which had been ragged and heavy until then, began to calm down. Slowly, warily, his small hand slid from the edge of the table and touched hers. The silence that fell in the restaurant was almost tangible. The guests stopped whispering. Someone left an unfinished glass. Someone else rubbed his eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The millionaire took a step back. Just a moment ago, he was ready to shout and threaten, but now he didn't know what to say. He stared at his child, who suddenly found solace in the presence of an ordinary waitress. Laura felt a lump growing in her throat. She was afraid that everyone would shout at her, that someone would fire her from her job. And yet the little hand that held hers was more important to her than all the stares in the room. This child needs more than money and luxury. A thought crossed her mind. There was a loud rustle behind them. Some applauded, others were still in disbelief, and the millionaire himself looked at Laura as if, for the first time in a long time, he had no answer. Leonard. The millionaire's voice trembled as he saw that his son, who had just been raging like a small storm, was now sitting quietly, holding the hand of the unknown mocha waitress. "What about you?" He didn't finish. He didn't know what words to choose. The dining hall was full of whispers, each one piercing his pride like a pin. Just an hour ago, he had entered here like a king, greeted by nods of heads, jealous glances from men, and admiration from women. Now he stood here helpless with his son, who was throwing porcelain like a common street hooligan. The guest glanced at him mercilessly. He really can't control his own child. The elegant woman in the dress whispered to her companion, "Money is money, but you can't buy character." The older gentleman muttered, adjusting his glasses. "You see, my dear, wealth does not buy class," added another woman, not hiding her satisfaction. The millionaire felt a chill run down his neck. It was no ordinary evening. Today's dinner was supposed to be a meeting at which he was supposed to finalize a major contract with foreign partners. The restaurant was full of business people, investors, and journalists, and now everyone had a story that would be in the newspapers tomorrow. The son of a tycoon father made a scene in a restaurant. The city's richest man ridiculed by his own child has seen these headlines before. Yet what hurt him most was the fact that the problem was solved by an inconspicuous girl in a white shirt and an oversized apron. He looked at her carefully. She was pale and her gaze was lowered, as if she was afraid that any prolonged eye contact would be interpreted as disrespect. Yet she had something in her that he himself did not have. Composure. Leonard was still shaking her hand. His little fingers clung to her hand, as if he were afraid that if he let go, the world would collapse again. "Who are you?" The billionaire's voice came out sharper than he intended. Laura looked up uncertainly. "I just work here as a waitress, sir." "Just a waitress?" Someone from the hall repeated in a low voice, and it just hung in the air like a verdict. The restaurant owner quickly approached, drenched in sweat. "Mr. Ronsky, please don't worry. We will clean up immediately. Everything will be paid for." The millionaire didn't listen. His attention was still riveted by this girl. How was it possible that her presence was enough to stop his son from screaming? After all, he spent a fortune on the best child psychologists, nannies, and teachers. Each of them gave up after a few days, claiming that the boy was a difficult case. "Leonard, let go of this lady," he said sharply. The boy shook his head. "No." The child's voice echoed in the silence. Everyone looked in disbelief. It was the first word that had come out of his mouth since the beginning of the argument, and it sent a clear message. "I won't let go." The millionaire felt as if someone had slapped him in the face. He was supposed to be the authority. It was his son who was supposed to listen to him. Instead, the child was clinging to the hand of a strange girl. Laura felt that the situation was getting out of control. "Sir, I really didn't do anything." "He just had enough," he interrupted her coldly. But the people at the neighboring table saw more. They saw that her presence calmed the child, that she, quiet and inconspicuous, did what the man whose name was a symbol of power and money could not do. Waiters began to collect the shards of porcelain, and the room slowly returned to normal. But that didn't mean the humiliation was over. The millionaire pushed back his chair and sat down heavily, hiding his face in his hands. He had never felt so small. His accomplices looked at him with hidden smiles. Some people even wrote things down on their phones. He knew that tomorrow these photos could spread across the country. Laura wanted to leave. She really wanted to, but the boy wouldn't let go of her hand. So she sat quietly, not knowing what to do. Her heart was pounding like a hammer, and at the same time she felt something inside that she hadn't experienced for a long time, a strange courage. Mr. Ronsky, one of the business partners, a tall man in an elegant gray suit, spoke up. "I see you have challenges in your family, but please don't worry. We are all only human." There was mockery in his voice, though he pretended to be polite. The millionaire looked at him from under his furrowed brow. He felt that he could not afford to lose what remained of his authority. "The matter is under control," he replied icily, but she wasn't. Everyone saw it. Laura lowered her gaze and leaned slightly toward the boy. "Would you like some water?" she asked quietly. Leonard nodded. That little sigh, so ordinary, made my father feel another pang of defeat. His son had been ignoring him for weeks, not speaking to him, and now he was answering questions from a strange waitress. Inside, he felt anger, but the anger was mixed with something he didn't want to admit to himself, gratitude, because for the first time in many months, he saw his son at peace. Laura handed the boy a glass of water. He took it with both hands and took a small sip, not letting go of her hand. Whispers again broke out in the hall. You see, she really has an influence on him. Maybe this girl should work at his house. Incredible. An ordinary waitress. Every word pierced the billionaire's heart. An ordinary waitress. This term sounded like a reproach. He who despised servants, who had never looked down on employees, now had to acknowledge that it was someone like that who had saved his reputation from complete disaster. He closed his eyes for a moment. He saw the face of his dead wife, the only person who could understand Leonardo. Since her death, the boy has changed beyond recognition, and he has taken up business. He was running away from the pain, leaving his son with nannies and therapists. Maybe that was why now the strange girl could do something he couldn't. The millionaire suddenly stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked over to Laura. Thank you, he said it dryly, making it sound more like duty than gratitude. Please sit down for a moment. The girl looked at him in surprise. But I have responsibilities. This is an order. Leonard looked at his father and squeezed her hand tighter again. Stay. The millionaire sighed. He was humiliated like never before. But he already knew he had to find out more about this girl. Who was she? Why did his son react to her? There was an atmosphere of tension in the room, but also curiosity. The guests were waiting for the spectacle to continue, and he knew there was no turning back. This story was just beginning. Stay for a while. The billionaire's voice was firm, though it trembled beneath the surface. Laura felt her heart jump into her throat. She had no choice. Leonard held her hand so tightly as if his life depended on it. For a few seconds, she felt like disappearing, vanishing into thin air. Everyone in the room was looking only at her. She, an ordinary waitress who had spent the last month wishing no one would pay attention to her, now stood at the center of events. What is your name? The billionaire asked quietly, but in a tone that left no doubt that he expected an answer. Laura whispered. Okay, Laura repeated, as if to test how it sounded on his tongue. Can you explain to me what just happened? Laura lowered her gaze. I really don't know, sir. I just walked up to him and shook his hand. Leonard, as if confirming her words, squeezed her hand even tighter and buried his face in her wound. Whispers again broke out in the hall. Someone burst out laughing, someone else cleared his throat in embarrassment. The millionaire grimaced. This sight was both touching and humiliating. Amazing, he muttered coldly. Thousands of zlotys spent on the best specialists, and all it took was a waitress. This word hurt Laura. She lowered her head even lower, feeling her cheeks burn red. She wasn't used to attention, let alone ridicule. She started working at a restaurant because she needed money. Things were always hard in her family. Her father left when she was 10, leaving her mother with debts and 2 children. Laura, although she was still a teenager at the time, took care of her younger brother, who was often sick. She was the one who calmed his nightly anxiety attacks, sang him lullabies, and held his hand when he was afraid to fall asleep. Maybe that's why she reacted so naturally now. She had no knowledge of psychology and did not know educational methods. She only had a heart that knew that sometimes a touch and presence were enough to calm the storm. Mr. Ronsky, maybe. Maybe he just needed someone who wasn't afraid of his screams. She dared to speak quietly. The millionaire looked at her sharply. He was used to people weighing every word in his presence, and this girl dared to do more than just be polite. No one is afraid of him, he replied icily. My son is spoiled and capricious. Laura remained silent. She didn't want to argue, but she knew it wasn't true. I saw fear in the child's eyes, not just anger. Dad, Leonard suddenly said. His voice was quiet but clear. Don't shout at her. The child's words hung in the air like lightning. The hall fell silent. The guests exchanged glances. It was the first time the boy had spoken to his father in months. The millionaire opened his mouth but said nothing. This moment hurt him more than all the whispers of the guests. Laura felt she should do something to lighten the mood. She leaned towards the boy. Do you want to go out for a while, for air? She asked gently. Leonard nodded. The millionaire waved his hand at the security guard, but the boy immediately reacted by pushing his hand away. With her, he pointed to Laura. The silence that fell was louder than any noise. Laura looked at the millionaire uncertainly. She saw anger, humiliation, but also helplessness in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but only for a moment. They left through the side door leading to the terrace. The air was cool and smelled of autumn and rain. Leonard clung to Laura as if she were his only salvation. Sorry, the boy whispered suddenly, looking at her from under his long eyelashes. I didn't mean to scream like that. Laura felt her heart tighten. She stroked his hair. I know, sometimes it's so hard that we don't know how to do it any other way. The boy snuggled into her. The millionaire watched this scene from a few steps away, leaning against the railing. Thoughts were swirling in his head. He didn't know that look in his son's eyes, a look full of trust. He didn't know that tone of voice, gentle, fragile, and yet sincere. Who are you, girl? He thought, looking at Laura. He felt that something was happening that he had not planned. He hated losing control. LaRue spoke after a moment. I want to talk to you after dinner. The girl turned pale, but I'm just working a shift here. He repeated this order in a tone that brooked no objection. Laura felt her hands tremble. She didn't know if it was fear or a premonition that her life might change that evening. At that moment, Terrace was flooded with flashlights. Several paparazzi managed to find out about the quarrel and took photos. A boy cuddled up to an ordinary waitress, a millionaire in the background with a face full of tension. And although Laura didn't realize it yet, this photo was to be broadcast all over the country the next day. Sit down. The millionaire's voice was sharp as steel, though muffled, as if he didn't want the guests inside the room to hear. Laura looked at him uncertainly. They were now sitting in the private lounge of the restaurant to which he had invited her after dinner. It was quieter there than in the main hall, although the sound of conversation and the sound of the piano still drifted through the door. Leonard sat next to her on the sofa, clutching her hand tightly as if he were afraid someone would snatch it away. The millionaire, Mr. Ronsky, paced around the room like a predator in a cage. His elegant suit gleamed in the lamplight, but his face betrayed fatigue and something else, wounded pride. Explain to me how this is possible, he began coldly. No one, absolutely no one could cope with my son. And you, an ordinary waitress, come up, extend your hand, and the hysteria ends. Laura lowered her head. I, sir, really don't know. Don't you know? He snorted. It doesn't matter if you know. The facts speak for themselves. Leonard looked up at his father. Dad, don't yell at her. Those 4 words cut the silence like a razor. The millionaire stopped, looked at his son, and took a deep breath. It was a voice that had not been spoken to him for a long time, a voice that reminded him of the woman he loved and lost, the boy's mother. Laura felt her heart tremble. She wanted to leave. She wanted to return to her safe anonymity, to the role of the girl who delivers plates and no one notices her. But Leonard didn't let go of her hand. Please, sir, she said quietly, I'm not doing anything extraordinary. Really? Maybe he just needed someone to be next to him, not across from him. The millionaire looked at her carefully. His eyes were like 2 blades. They examined, assessed, looked for weaknesses. Yet somewhere deep down there was a question he was afraid to ask out loud. Was it possible that all his fortune, all his power and influence, were nothing compared to the simplicity of this girl? Where are you from? He asked suddenly. Laura fell silent in surprise from a small town near Warsaw. Her voice was shaking, but she was telling the truth. My mother raised me alone. Father left. I took care of my younger brother. He was sickly, cried often, and couldn't sleep. I learned to calm him down. That's all. The millionaire grimaced. A story so ordinary, and yet in this simplicity there was an answer. Leonard listened carefully, still snuggled against her side. So he summed up this experience. Living in poverty and having to take care of your brother. This gave you a skill that the best schools and doctors cannot buy. Laura did not answer. She didn't know if it was praise or mockery. There was silence. There was a tension in the air that no one could break. Finally, Vronsky cleared his throat. I have a proposition. Laura looked up. I need someone like you to be close to my son. I see that you trust me more than anyone else, and I cannot allow these scenes to be repeated in public. It's destroying him and me." He paused for a moment, then added, slowly, "I want you to be his guardian." Laura felt the ground slipping from under her feet. "What?" she whispered. "But I'm just a waitress. You won't be a waitress anymore," he replied dryly. "You will work for me in my home full-time. Remuneration." He waved his hand. "Salary will not be a problem." Leonard beamed. "Yes, Dad, I want her to stay." Laura froze. It was like a dream, or rather a nightmare and a dream all at once. Working for a millionaire in his home meant breaking free from poverty and constant uncertainty. But it also meant becoming entangled in a world she feared. The world of big money, newspapers, flashes, lies, and expectations. "Sir, I don't know if he's suitable." Her voice was barely audible. "I never. You are more suitable than anyone else." The millionaire interrupted her. "I saw it with my own eyes." Leonard smiled, holding her hand tightly. "Stay, please." Laura looked at the child, then at the father. She felt that no matter what she answered, her life would never be the same again. In the silence, one could hear the faint ticking of the clock that is standing in the corner of the living room. Every second felt like a countdown to a decision that could not be undone. Finally, she said, "I need time to think." Vronsky raised his eyebrows. He was used to people jumping when he gave orders. This was the first person in a long time who dared to tell him, "Not now, you have 24 hours." He replied coldly, "Then I want to hear the answer." He stood up, signaling to the security guard to end the meeting. Leonard looked disappointed but didn't protest. Laura stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking, but she felt a strange warmth inside. She didn't know what scared her more. Think about staying in this world or rejecting the offer. As she left the living room, she knew one thing. Her peaceful, quiet life had just ended. Laura returned to her small apartment on the outskirts of the city with the feeling that her legs were failing her. The street was almost empty. The street lamps cast long streaks of light, and the damp evening air clung to my skin. She was holding a bag with her uniform in her hand, and the millionaire's words were still ringing in her head. "You have 24 hours." She climbed the creaking stairs of the tenement house and opened the door to the rented studio apartment. The familiar smell of tea and moisture greeted her. On the table stood a frame with a photo of my mother and younger brother. She stared at it for a moment, as if searching for an answer. "What should I do, Mom?" she whispered, put down her bag, sat down on the old couch and covered her face with her hands. She could still feel the touch of Leonardo's small hand. Warm, trusting, as if saying, "Don't leave me." This feeling gave her no peace. She took her phone out of her coat pocket. The screen lit up with dozens of notifications. A colleague from work wrote, "Laura, have you seen it? You're on the internet." With trembling fingers, she opened the message with the link. The website of one of the local newspapers showed a photo. She, an ordinary waitress, crouching next to a crying boy. Next to them in the background is the silhouette of a billionaire. The title screamed in capital letters. An unknown waitress silenced the tycoon's son. An unusual scene in a luxury restaurant. Laura covered her mouth with her hand. Other portals copied these stories, and internet users competed with each other in their comments. "This is a woman with a heart, not one of those plastic caregivers worth millions." "Well done, girl. A simple gesture." And he did more than all the money in the world. "I wonder if a billionaire will hire her. He'll probably find a way to take credit for it anyway, period." Laura felt the blood drain from her face. She never wanted publicity, and now her face was everywhere. The phone rang. It was Anka, a friend from the restaurant. "Laura, what's the best thing you've ever done?" she heard in the receiver. "All of Poland is talking about it. Did you know that paparazzi have been standing in front of the restaurant since the morning?" "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "Nothing, girl. Everyone saw how you steeped that brat's hysteria. It's a miracle." "Anna, please." Laura closed her eyes. I just shook his hand. "You see, sometimes that's enough," Anka sighed. "But I advise you to be careful. Rich people don't like being ridiculed. And you? Well, you did it publicly." Laura felt her stomach tighten into a knot. After the conversation, she sat in silence for a long time. She thought about her mother and her brother, who now lived in a boarding school and still needed her financial support. She also thought that working at the restaurant would not be enough to provide him with treatment. On the other hand, entering the world of a millionaire was like entering another galaxy. There was no room for simplicity and silence. She heard his voice in her mind. You will work for me in my home. Salary will not be a problem. Could she afford to refuse? The next day there was chaos at work. Reporters appeared at the restaurant. The owner nervously paced around the room, and the guests took photos of each waiter as if expecting miracles. Laura, the boss called out when he saw her in the doorway. To the office immediately. She entered hesitantly. The man, usually gentle, was pale and sweaty today. What's the best thing you've done, he hissed. All the media attention was focused on us. I don't know whether to thank you or fire you. I'm sorry, Mr. Adam. I didn't plan this. You didn't plan to? He slammed his hand on the table. Do you understand that at this moment I have calls from embassies, newspapers, and even from Mr. Ronsky's office? He wants to meet you privately. Laura felt her heart jump into her throat. But I don't know if I should. You shouldn't. The boss grabbed his head. Girl, this is the chance of a lifetime. If he hires you, you'll be set for years, and if you refuse him, believe me, no one will accept you anywhere else. Laura left the office feeling like her world was crashing down on her. After work, she returned to her apartment. The evening news began with a report from a restaurant. The presenter smiled as he talked about the mysterious waitress who won the hearts of millions of internet users. Videos recorded by guests were shown, showing her silhouette leaning over the boy, his small hand in hers. God, Laura whispered to the empty room. What should I do? The phone rang. This time it was an unknown number. She hesitated but answered. Miss Laura, a cold male voice rang out. Mr. Ronsky's secretary says, a car will come for you tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. Please be ready. But I didn't ask, just to let you know. See you later. The conversation was cut short. Laura sank into a chair. She felt there was no turning back. The world she had kept her distance from all her life was now knocking on her door. Or rather, it was entering without asking. That evening, she couldn't sleep for a long time. She lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the street. She thought of her mother, her brother, her dreams, which had always been small and modest, her own studio apartment, a quiet job, security, and now someone was offering her something beyond her imagination. Maybe this was the moment, she whispered to herself. Maybe this was the gesture that would change everything. She didn't fall asleep until the early morning, feeling that her life had just come to a head. A deep horn roused Laura from her slumber. She jumped out of bed. The tangled blanket fell to the floor. She glanced at the clock. It was almost 9:00. Her heart beat faster because she knew what that meant. A black limousine pulled up to her building. The car looked absurd in this place. A cramped yard, scuffed walls, crooked sidewalks, and amidst it all, a luxurious machine with a gleaming body. The neighborhood children stopped, pointing. An elderly neighbor leaned out the window, muttering something under her breath. Laura pulled aside the curtain and felt her cheeks burn. They really did come for me, she thought. It wasn't a dream. For a moment, she wanted to lock the door and pretend no one was there. But she knew that was impossible. She took a deep breath, put on a simple navy blue dress, and stepped out into the stairwell. A driver in a suit was waiting at the entrance to the building. He opened the limousine door without a word, as if he were part of some ritual. Miss Laura, he asked, though the answer was obvious. She whispered. She got in. The interior of the car smelled of leather and expensive perfume. She had never sat in anything like this before. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them tightly in her lap. The car moved off. Familiar streets passed by outside the window, but inside there was silence, broken only by the steady hum of the engine. Laura felt like someone who had accidentally stepped onto the stage of a grand theater and didn't know the role. When the limousine stopped in front of the residence, Laura felt breathless. Mr. Ronsky's villa was enormous. White walls, columns, gardens trimmed so evenly that each leaf seemed to have its own gardener. The gate opened automatically, and the security guards in elegant uniforms nodded. Follow me, the driver. I am always saying, the driver said, leading her through the hall where the floor gleamed like a mirror. Laura walked slowly, afraid she would trip on the marble stairs. They stopped before a large, dark wooden door. The driver opened it and let her in. The room was enormous, a library with tall shelves holding hundreds of books. Mr. Ronsky sat at his desk. He looked different without his suit. In a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, he seemed more human, but his gaze remained hard. "Sit down," he pointed to the armchair opposite. Laura sat down, nervously adjusting her dress. "Have you decided?" he asked without further preamble. "I am, sir." She began, but her voice broke. "I don't know if I'm the right person. I've never worked for someone like me," he finished for her. "It's obvious, but your lack of experience is an advantage in this case." Laura looked at him in surprise. "An advantage?" "Yes." He rested his elbows on the desk. "Everyone I've ever employed treated my son like a problem to be solved. You treated him like a human being. That's the difference." There was a moment of silence. Laura felt her heart beat faster. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "There are so many better educated people with experience." Ronsky smiled, bitterly, because none of them could gain his trust. "And you did it in a minute." Laura lowered her gaze. She didn't know what to answer. "Tell me one thing," he continued. "Why did you approach him then? You could have pretended nothing was happening like the rest of the staff." She took a deep breath because I saw something familiar in his eyes. What was it? Fear? Her voice was quiet but confident. My brother was the same. When he had panic attacks, he'd scream, throw things, and everyone thought he was rude. Only I knew he was simply afraid. I've learned that sometimes a touch is enough to make someone feel safe. Vronsky looked at her for a long time. For the first time in a long time, he had the feeling that someone was telling him the truth, unvarnished, without calculation. "Is your brother alive?" he asked unexpectedly. Laura nodded. "That's how it is in the boarding school. Sick, but fighting." The billionaire leaned back in his chair and pondered. "I understand." The door opened and Leonard ran in. Dad shouted, then saw Laura and beamed. Laura ran and threw his arms around her neck. The girl stiffened, but after a moment she returned the hug. "I knew you'd come," the boy said with a smile. Ronsky watched the scene with a mixture of astonishment and envy. His son, who for months hadn't wanted to speak to him, was now hugging a strange girl. "See?" he spoke softly. "It's not me who's calming him down. It's not the doctors. It's you." Laura felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she couldn't cry. "Not here, not with him. Mr. Ronsky, I really don't know if I can be a caregiver." Her voice trembled, "But I know I don't want this boy to feel alone." Leonard smiled broadly and squeezed her hand. The millionaire sighed, so only one question remained. He looked her straight in the eye. "Are you ready to enter my world, a world where there's no room for privacy, mistakes, or weakness?" Laura remained silent. She knew that this wasn't an ordinary job offer. This was an entrance into a world from which there would be no return. Flashbulbs crackled outside the window. Paparazzi were lurking by the door. Her picture was in the newspapers again. Laura closed her eyes. "I'll try," she whispered. Leonard jumped for joy. "I knew it." Ronsky nodded. "Good. From now on, you're part of this house." "Miss Laura, right?" she said in a tone devoid of any sympathy. "My name is Mrs. Elżbieta. I've been managing this house for 20 years. Laura nodded, trying not to show how tense she was. "Yes, it's me. I've heard of you," the woman continued. Everyone had. Her lips twisted into a slight grimace. "A small scene in a restaurant, and suddenly you're an internet heroine." Laura felt her cheeks flush. "I didn't want publicity. You didn't, but you have it." Mrs. Elżbieta narrowed her eyes. "And please remember one thing. There's no room for anything in this house. Mistakes. Every gesture, every word is being watched." Laura lowered her gaze. She knew this woman would not be her ally. After a few minutes, Leonard ran into the living room. Laura exclaimed joyfully, running towards her. Mrs. Elizabeth watched the scene with cool detachment. "I see you have a special influence on Mr. Leonard." Her tone sounded like an accusation, not praise. Leonard released Laura and pulled her by the hand. "Come, I'll show you my room." They ran upstairs, leaving behind glances full of gossip and suspicion. The boys' room was huge, filled with toys, games, model airplanes, and robots. But amidst it all, chaos reigned. Scattered clothes, broken figurines, destroyed books. It was clear that tantrums had taken place here too. No one comes here, Leonard said seriously. Only me, Piney. But now you can too. Laura smiled gently. Thank you for your trust. The boy sat down on the bed. You know, they all don't like me. Teachers, nannies, the security guards always say I'm rude. But you didn't say anything. Laura sat down next to him because I know it's sometimes hard to say how I feel. And then you scream for someone to finally notice. Leonard looked at her gratefully. You noticed me. Those words made Laura's heart leap. She knew she'd bonded with this child more deeply than she should have. That evening, she was invited to a conversation in Mr. Ronsky's office. The atmosphere was heavy. He sat behind a huge desk, and she opposite, feeling like a student before the principal. Is your decision final? He asked, looking at her with a hard gaze. Laura swallowed hard. Yes, I'll stay, but please understand I'm not doing this for the money. He didn't raise an eyebrow, she looked him straight in the eye. For him, for Leonard. Ronsky was silent for a moment, then sighed. Fine, but if you're staying in my house, you must know one thing. It won't be easy. The media already knows who you are. They'll be following you. Every step, and I cannot allow anyone to use my son against me. Laura felt the ground slipping from under her feet. Mr. Ronsky, I never will. It's not a matter of intentions. It's a matter of facts. His voice was hard. From this moment on, you are part of this house, and that means your private life ceases to exist. Laura held her breath. Are you ready to pay this price? He asked coldly. A long silence fell. Laura felt this question was like a threshold that cannot be crossed without consequences. This is what she finally whispered. I'm ready. After the conversation, she returned to her guest room. It was beautiful, decorated in bright colors, overlooking the garden, but despite the luxury, Laura felt a strange emptiness. She knew the door had closed behind her, and she would never open it the other way again. She sat on the bed and then looked out the window. Flashes flashed in the background. The paparazzi didn't leave the residence for a moment. What have I gotten myself into? She whispered to herself. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she felt she had done what she had to for the child, for Leonard, because she saw something in his eyes, a hope you couldn't ignore. The evening at the mansion promised to be special. Several dozen guests had gathered in the grand ballroom room. Business partners, acquaintances from high society, journalists. It was a meeting intended to strengthen Mr. Ronsky's image after the restaurant scandal. Laura, though she felt uncomfortable, had to be there. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, but Leonard's presence was obvious, and the boy insisted he wouldn't go without her. Promise you'll be by my side, he said as they climbed the marble stairs together. I promise, she whispered, squeezing his small hand. The hall sparkled with crystal chandeliers. Conversation mingled with the sounds of a string quartet. When Mr. Ronsky appeared, all eyes turned to him. He was composed, elegant, but Laura could see the tension in his jaw. Leonard, dressed in a small tuxedo, stood at his father's side, but as soon as he felt his eyes, all the guests turned to him. He stiffened. His breathing quickened. His hands began to tremble. Dad, I can't, Mr. Ronsky whispered. He paled. He felt a disaster looming. One more outburst of hysteria, and all efforts to save his reputation would be in vain. Then Laura knelt beside the boy, just as she had held out her hand in the restaurant. Leonard, look at me. The boy looked. There was panic in his eyes, but also a glint of trust. You are safe, she said quietly, so only he could hear. I'm holding you. A small hand slipped into hers. Leonard took a deep breath and calmed down. The guests stared in disbelief. The room, which had been silent for a moment, came alive again, but this time not with whispers of indignation, but with a murmur of admiration. Incredible. It's that girl from the restaurant. He only really reacts to her. Mr. Ronsky stood next to his son and Laura. His face was serious, but something new gleamed in his eyes, something no one had ever seen before. He saw, ladies and gentlemen, he began loudly, his voice echoing through the room. You all saw what happened a few days ago. You saw my son's weakness and my helplessness. The guests froze. These were not the words they expected from a billionaire, but you also saw something else. He pointed to Laura, the young woman who, with a simple gesture, had done what no one else could. Laura felt her cheeks flush. She wanted to disappear, but she couldn't. Many of you asked me later who she was. The answer is simple. It was Laura, an ordinary girl, a waitress who came into my life by accident. But today, I know that nothing happens by accident. The room murmured. She reminded me that it's not money, influence, or power that matters most. The most important thing is whether we can be present. Can we reach out when someone needs it? Leonard smiled broadly, squeezing Laura's hand tightly. That's why, from today on, Laura is part of my home. The millionaire's voice was firm and unwavering. I'll let anyone look down on her. Applause erupted in the hall. Some applauded sincerely, others dutifully, but it sounded like a wave that enveloped everyone. Laura felt her heart pounding. Just a few days ago, she had been an anonymous waitress dreaming of peace. Now she stood in the spotlight next to the richest man in town and his son. But instead of Lenku, she felt something else, peace. Because she knew it wasn't about her, but about the boy who had finally found someone who understood him. After the ceremony, when the hall had emptied, Laura went out onto the terrace. She needed a moment of silence. The night sky stretched over the gardens, and crickets could be heard in the distance. Thank you. Mr. Ronsky's voice suddenly sounded beside her as she turned. He stood in the semi-darkness, without the businessman mask he usually wore. He was tired, but sincerity shone in his eyes. For what? She asked. For him. He pointed toward the window where Leonard slept. You gave him something. What I couldn't give. Laura lowered her gaze. I just shook his hand, and for years I couldn't do that, he replied bitterly. I've taken up business. I was running away from memories, and he suffered. Silence fell. Laura felt that at that moment she wasn't looking at the billionaire, but at the human being. He needs you, he said quietly. And I think I do too. Laura looked up. In his eyes, she saw something that surprised her. Gratitude, but also humility. Mr. Ronsky, she began, but he interrupted. Call me by my name. I'm Adam. That simple sentence sounded like a promise of change. The next day, the newspapers were full of photos again, but this time the headlines were different. The billionaire has spoken. Family is the most important thing. An unknown waitress has become a hero. Laura is part of my home. This is Adam Ronsky. Laura stared at the headlines in disbelief. She knew her life would never return to its former rhythm. But when Leonard ran into her room and snuggled into her, smiling from ear to ear, she knew she'd made the right decision. Because sometimes a quiet gesture is enough to change not just one life, but two, maybe even three. This was just the beginning. This story shows that sometimes small acts and a simple gesture can change everything. If you believe that good comes back, leave a comment and subscribe to the story every day. This is just the beginning of many touching stories. Amen.